like to give the first promoted Professor Frans van der Vossen the words to start the proposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear candidate, could you give a to diagnosis a disease? And the disease I worked on is called atherosclerotic disease of the carotid artery, the artery which is feeding the brain in the neck. And the healthy artery should be like a tubular structure with multi-layers, but over time, some other materials can accumulate, like fat or other materials or immune cells, and this can grow into really complex morphology. Today, what doctors do is they look at the artery with the ultrasound and they see how big it is, they see the shape, and they do some flow measurements to get the stenosis level. With this, it means that how narrowing down occurred in the vessel. But the stenosis level doesn't indicate the vulnerability, because the real danger occurs when this plug ruptures and smaller pieces can go into the bloodstream and completely block the blood flow through the brain. But from the previous studies, we know that the composition of the plug more important indicator of the vulnerability than its size. And if you look at the ultrasound is based on the softness of the materials, and the materials that compose a plug has a similar softness levels. But if you look at the optical absorption of those materials, like lipid and blood, they have some differences. So we can benefit optical methods, and photoacoustics comes into the picture at this stage. When you send a pulse laser light to a tissue, it diffuses inside the tissue, then it's absorbed in a location if you have an absorber there, and that absorbers converts those optical energy into heat, which expands those absorbers, and this sudden expansion creates a ultrasonic wave which propagates through the tissue, and then by measuring those in the skin surface, you can reconstruct back the initial absorption distribution. That's the basis of photoacoustics, and this can provide you the composition information which can help you to assess the vulnerability of the plug. But for such a technology to be used in clinics, there are some challenges to be overcome, because this artery is in the neck, surrounded by the surrounding tissue, and it's also there is skin in between, and this blood flowing through the artery, and it's also pulsating, so your target is moving. So what we did is, therefore, we started ex vivo to show the feasibility of the study. We obtained plugs from real patients in the Katarina Hospital, and we brought them into our laboratory, and we mounted them into our experimental setup, which allows us to position our probe and also rotate our samples in 3D. And with this, we used a single wavelength to target blood, and instead of using one image from one position, we also developed a technique that allows us to compound or combine all the data that's acquired from multiple positions. So with this, we were able to show that ultrasound can nicely provide you see the grayscale image, the shape, the structure, and on top of it, with photoacoustics, you can have an idea about what's inside that plug. And if you look at the one-to-one comparison of cross-sectional images with the real histological images, we showed that the photoacoustic signals we see in our imaging is actually coming from the internal bleedings of the plug, which are really important indications of the vulnerability. Here, the yellow are the pictures, and with the ultrasound you see the shape, and photoacoustic is on top of it, the overlaid images. So one wavelength shows you one thing, but that's not enough. That's why we want to have complete morphology, and by using multiple wavelengths, we want to achieve this. And instead of using the same setup, instead of using one wavelength, we use 4 wavelengths. And then we adopted a technique, is widely known as cocktail party problem in data science. Suppose that in a big room, really crowded, people are talking at the same time, and all those sounds are mixed. And if you can record those sound waves with the different microphones from different locations, there is a way to computationally unmix those individual speakers. So in photoacoustic, it's the same. We built a known artificial vessel with some known materials on its wall, and with the photoacoustics, all those materials give some response at the same time. And by doing unmixing, you can unmix individual components, as you see the first and second component, and also the background noise from the images. We tried same technique on ex vivo plug images, On the grayscale image, you see nicely the shape with the ultrasound provided by ultrasound imaging. And if you overlay those images with the unmixed components obtained from photoacoustics, you see that they correspond to different regions in the plug. And if you look closer to those regions in histology images, we show that those independent components, for example, first one is corresponding to recent hemorrhages, the second one is more old hemorrhages accompanied with the cholesterols, and the third one, the fourth one is always giving you the surrounding layer of the artery. So we have a nice experimental method to rotate the sample to acquire multiple images, but in reality it's not possible to rotate the patient. So, but still in vivo we will have a limited range of rotation. So we wanted to investigate with a limited range of rotation, will this technique still be beneficial for us? And we showed that this really depends on the location of the absorber. If you have an absorber close to your probe, then by adding more images to your system, you can maybe decrease your image quality a little bit. But if you have an absorber that's far away from your probe, then you can gain much more than that potentially you can lose. That's why we showed that this technique really can help us when it's applied in vivo. So whenever we have a technique in photoacoustics, we try it on phantoms, and building a realistic phantom is really hard to do. That's why we wanted to have a photoacoustic simulation toolchain that will allow us to simulate those effects on computer. What we did is we started from optics and we simulated how the optics light diffuses inside the tissue. Then we coupled those with the acoustic simulations to completely simulate the photoacoustic effect. And on a phantom, we showed that we can actually replicate the measured experimental data with the simulations. And then what we did is we segmented our histology images to create a 3D volume and then do the simulation on those samples. And here you see again with the ultrasound and photoacoustic images, and we showed that we can nicely replicate our experiments on the simulation, so we can replicate the photoacoustic signals. Further, we can add more realism to this imaging, and we can simulate what will happen if we apply this in the patient. And here you see that if you change the surrounding medium to a realistic tissue, then you can nicely replicate the aberration effects will probably take place because of the speed of sound changes. So with all those, now we have a complete working system and show the feasibility. What we showed is we showed that photoacoustic can provide intra-plug hemorrhages by using a certain wavelength, and using multi-wavelengths and using unmixing technique, photoacoustic can also identify different morphological information, and using multiple images at the same time and compounding them can help us to increase our image quality in vivo. And at the end, we have a nice verification step as a simulation tool, so that in future more techniques can be tested and verified using this simulation toolchain. And with all those, we can today confidently say that we are more close to clinics with this technique if we compare it to 5 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this good and nice overview, and I would like to give the word back to the chair. Okay. The Eindhoven University of Technology appreciates it very much when experts from abroad want to participate in PhD courses. And for that, we are very obliged to welcome Professor Schmitz from Ruhr Universiteit in Bochum and Professor de Korte from the University of Groningen. And for now I would like... oh, sorry, Nijmegen. I hope I didn't offend you. No. And I would like to ask Professor Schmitz now to continue with the opposition.
Thank you very much, dear candidate. First, I want to congratulate you on your work, because you did a lot of experiments, you did a lot of lab experiments and tested them. And I think that was quite some work, and it was well done. And you found a lot of new insight into photoacoustic imaging, also by comparing these experiments. That also leads me to my first questions, because you did, for example, in this part where you did the compounding, you found out by experiments the results that it's good to have a scatterer farther away where compounding will help. You found out how much it helps when you use a limited angle. My question is, you use the reconstruction technique, which is case-based reconstruction, so it reconstructs in the frequency spectral domain. And I wonder, couldn't you also have a theoretical insight what you would expect by changing your angle to come out as an improved resolution of the images or clutter suppression? Have you thought of that?
Popular opponent, thank you for your nice words and the question. As you said, we did the experimental study to show how the compounding performs, and we also applied this to the previously acquired experimental data. We showed it in first phantoms. What we did is we applied the compounding after the reconstruction. So basically, you have the spatial information, and you have, if you assume that the reconstructed images are actually the absorption map, so they have positive values, and that's mapped into a 2D image. And by compounding those images, you basically can increase your SNR and CNR as we showed. But this is something when you change your acquisition position, this is something further than only doing something computationally in 2D, because in our system we also have laser attached to probe, and when you change the illumination acquisition position, we also change the illumination position, which also changes the illumination over the sample. So that also helps you to see the deeper structures, because you then have more chance to light to reach those regions. For your question, we also tried to come up with a new reconstruction method by using all those 3D data, but they didn't provide a better solution, better results than what we showed. So we could either maybe dig there further theoretically to come up with another reconstruction algorithm, or we could just present the experimental results and comment on that.
I agree, because especially what you said about the light source, that's true, because that you normally don't have in these acoustic considerations. But I wondered, when you add these images, you do this before you do the envelope, and as I saw, so you could, if you add them, then you could also add their Fourier transforms. There would be no difference because it's linear. So my question was more, could you think about, you said you improved the contrast, the SNR. Didn't you also improve the resolution? That you get a better resolution when you go just from one direction. Your lateral resolution normally is not that good. Didn't you improve that also?
Exactly, but I have to clarify that we applied the compounding after the envelope. So it's really after envelope data, everything is positive. So we assume that those are the absorption maps of the your reconstructed images. Because when there occurred also another problem there. When we apply it before the envelope and then apply the Hilbert transform to get the envelope, and it's one directional, so we have one directional artifacts, but the data is normally 2D. And we also saw that there are 2D Hilbert transform approach to get the envelope of 2D data, but then we didn't go in that direction because we already have the results after the envelope. And for your question, we didn't do the angular spectrum approach, like we didn't sum the data in the Fourier domain. But what I tried is I tried the raw data in delay and sum algorithm, similar to like a tomographic approach, using those data to create better images. But then on the RF data level, it's really susceptible to rotational center.